Welcome everyone again to another episode of the ideaXme show that profiles the humans behind the really big ideas that are shaping our world, inspiring the future and future creators, and for all those that like great stories. I'm Ira Pastor, your life sciences ambassador, along for your journey today. So, global demand for seafood is at an all-time high. Consumers are increasingly choosing to eat a variety of delicious and nutritious seafood products worldwide. Unfortunately, our global supply of seafood can't always keep pace with this demand, and populations of many marine species have been cut in half since the 1970s. All due to things like overfishing, illegal fishing, rising ocean temperatures, acidification, trawling, a number of other factors. At the same time, consumers are looking for much more from their food. Consumers are increasingly concerned about animal welfare, the conditions in which fish are farmed and caught, and they are concerned for personal welfare. Seafood can be contaminated with mercury, toxins, pathogens, microplastics, all sorts of nasty stuff that floats around in the ocean. Cellular agriculture, or more specifically cellular aquaculture, per our theme today, focuses on the production of products from cell cultures using a variety of different technologies, biotech, tissue engineering, molecular biology, all to create and design new methods of producing proteins, fats, different tissues that would otherwise come from traditional agriculture or aquaculture. I'm honored today to be joined by Lou Cooperhouse. Lou is the president and CEO of BlueNalu, which is a company whose mission is to be the leader in cellular aquaculture, providing consumers with a wide range of great tasting, healthy, safe, and trusted cell-based seafood products, ultimately to support sustainability and diversity in the ocean. Lou has degrees in both food science and microbiology from Rutgers University. He is recognized as a leading global authority in food business innovation and technology commercialization, has extensive leadership experience over the last 35 years in the food industry. Prior to this role, Lou was a CEO of Food Spectrum, LLC, where it provided a broad array of strategic consulting and business management services to the food industry. He was also the founder and executive director of Rutgers University Food Innovation Center and led that program for about 15 years. Before that, Lou served as president and chief operating officer of F&S Produce, which was a leading regional supplier of fresh cut produce and value-added refrigerated foods. He was co-founder, president, and CEO of Menu Direct Corporation, which was a unique health, wellness, and nutrition company. Earlier in his career, he had positions at such food organizations as Campbell Soup, ConAgra, Nestle, Idlewild Farms, and Grand Union. In addition to all that, Lou has substantial experience in both food safety and quality assurance systems, and he's provided leadership at numerous FDA and USDA inspected operations. He's certified in preventive controls for human food per the Food Safety Preventative Controls Alliance. He's a certified trainer in hazard analysis and critical control points per the International HACCP Alliance. He's also certified Serve Safe Food Protection Manager as issued by the American National Standards Institute. A lot going on, a lot we can discuss. Lou, thanks for taking the time to come on today.
Well, thanks, Ira. Thanks for having me.
It's a real pleasure. It's an exciting topic, very interesting topic, and I'm one of those folks that loves seafood, so I'm really interested in the discussion. But to start off, we typically give our guests the floor for a few minutes just to really talk about themselves. If you could sort of introduce yourself, go into your background, where you grew up, how you got interested in food science and microbiology, and ultimately a little bit of your journey through this unique industry to your role now as CEO of BlueNalu.
Well, thanks, Ira. Yeah, happy to give a little background, and thanks for that great introduction about kind of the global challenge we have with our seafood supply and the solution that we're excited about at BlueNalu to really solve. But in terms of background, I grew up in New Jersey. Actually, my dad was in the military, so he traveled all over as a young person. He retired in Central Jersey and ended up going to school at Rutgers, and just really became fascinated with microbiology, actually, and kind of learning about the world that you can't see, and just really found that quite interesting. And actually, while I was at Rutgers University, my first job was at Campbell Soup, So I did that while I was in grad school.
Mm-hmm.
I actually changed my major from microbiology. I was interested in going to the pharmaceutical sector initially, to food science. And actually the intersection of food science and microbiology happened to be exactly what I was working on, perishable foods.
Mm-hmm.
So just really extending the shelf life and really developing great quality foods, focusing on the perimeter of the supermarket where all the value was. Campbell's at that time launched a whole line of prepared refrigerated foods, and I was on the front end of that. And that kind of began my career, Ira, just really involved in startups.
Mm-hmm.
So not only was it perishable, but it was a startup operation working on the first multinational, working on something like a prepared refrigerated salad, like potato salad, coleslaw. Then we got into entrees, then we got into soups, then we got into desserts.
Mm-hmm.
So just a whole array of products were designed, and I actually led a initial market test, and actually worked in this unique environment where we actually worked in a shared use USDA inspected operation down in the Washington, D.C. area with a catering firm that worked for me. So I was always involved with kind of creative solutions for getting businesses started, from age 25 on. And so as you mentioned, subsequently just had, increasing responsibilities in R&D primarily. It kind of migrated into operations over time, and then migrated to business development over time, and then the whole picture over time to really expand my career. And early on, just kind of the front end of just found it fascinating, where food trends and technology intersected. So kind of as you mentioned, I was on the front end of perishable foods, and then technologies called modified atmosphere packaging, high pressure processing. The first company to ever pioneer sous vide processing, as well, post pasteurization of products. And then I kind of got increasingly interested in health and wellness back in the mid '90s even. And so I co-founded a company at that time, as you mentioned, that pioneered, both medical and nutritional foods for people with celiac disease. In the mid '90s, we actually saw a niche in actually developing gluten-free products when the category was nothing. And really, it was the first ever gluten-free lasagna, mac and cheese. And so I kind of got into the experiential, emotional products that people miss, like pizza, lasagna, for people that can't eat gluten. And then similarly, we did that for diabetes and other products. So I kind of really, kind of got into the psychology of the consumer behavior, and really where we can make a difference. And then frankly, Ira, since 2001, as you mentioned, I've done a lot of consulting, and I also took that as an opportunity to kind of give back a bit to the food industry, and with my startup experience, helping other companies start up. Sure. So the Rutgers Food Innovation Center was an incubator to really help support, entrepreneurship and create economic development, and basically a food industry ecosystem and cluster, working together with state government and the private sector to really engage with entrepreneurs, bring them into New Jersey, frankly, from a business attraction and retention perspective. And what was really fascinating, Ira, is it also turned out to be quite a window in innovation. So I literally had met with, well over 1,000 entrepreneurs over that, 15-year or so period that I was at Rutgers. And what I started to see was not just, more hot sauces and spreads and jams and jellies, but things that were alternative protein. So, I saw the category, really being birthed, so among my clients was actually Impossible Foods, that actually launched their U.S. business in New Jersey from a facility that I oversaw. So all the equipment specifications, selection, hiring, training, SOP development, standard operating procedures development, kind of happened under my watch and my team's watch. And I started to see plant-based cheeses. And what I really saw, just like my previous experience with like gluten-free, making bread and lasagna taste the same. People don't want to give up on what's most important to them. And the end of the day is taste. Yep. It needs to have all the functional benefits that makes it work, but people want to enjoy what they enjoy. And so I started to see it was plant-based cheeses that tasted really good. And I saw really bad ones, frankly. And I saw, oh my God, to make a mozzarella or a cheddar that's plant-based, phenomenal. And then I saw the plant-based burgers. But then I learned, Ira, about the whole new category being born, cell-based. you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I saw that it, you know, it was really first, you know, tested in a concept, if you will, back in 2013 in the
Mm-hmm.
Netherlands by a professor at Maastricht University who developed the first cell-based burger. Proof of concept. And I found myself, Ira, doing a lot of public speaking on food trends, you know,
Mm-hmm.
just in my role at Rutgers and just kind of my industry background. I do a lot of presentations on food trends, technologies, and innovations, and thinking about the future. And I started talking and literally saying, Ira, that there's a category that will be the most transformative thing the food industry's ever seen. It's
Mm-hmm.
alternative protein. It is going to transform this planet. And I was being very bold about that, going back, you know, 3, 4, 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
and even maybe a little bit earlier. And and then I started to talk about there's one category that's really, you know, where there could really be a holy grail moment here, you know, and I described it as cell-based seafood.
Okay.
And why cell-based seafood? For all the points you mentioned, Ira, obviously everything begins with you know the global opportunity or even the regional opportunity might exist. As you mentioned, demand is at all-time high, supply is diminishing, supply is increasingly complicated and even compromised, and certainly does not end up any kind of food secure situation. So it's a unique challenge that this world has to feed itself with seafood,
Mm-hmm.
and we just can't keep up. So there's a global niche. And I also saw on the other side that there's a global opportunity to actually, where the category was really beginning on cell-based meats. I saw the
Mm-hmm.
much more interesting and significant opportunity in cell-based seafood.
Mm-hmm.
It also lends itself, if it could be accomplished, with some really interesting upsides, because seafood industry, you know, commands a premium price. It's loved around the world. It's increasing in demand. And it's also, there's a lot of complexity around making a high-end, great tasting ribeye steak, for example. But we felt pretty confident that we could develop a high-end, great tasting Chilean sea bass fillet, red snapper, bluefin tuna, whatever the species might be, or mahi, that we could actually execute in a cell-based form.
Mm-hmm.
So we were fascinated by the fact that this represented an enormous marketplace, and also a technology that we thought we could actually really gravitate towards and accomplish. But we had to put together the right team. And you know, with that, I'll kind of stop on my background. But I'll leave it with. I was literally out doing a public presentation in Hawaii because I was doing a lot of consulting out there at the time. Believe it or not, in Honolulu,
Mm-hmm.
and literally saying that cell-based seafood is going to be, you know, an enormous opportunity, you know, the most incredible niche we've ever seen, not just a niche, but something quite transformative. And sure enough, in the audience, I ran into a venture capital group. And sure enough, I wasn't really looking to start a company, but I actually talked myself into what a big opportunity it was. And somebody says, I believe. And here we are 2.5 years later.
I really appreciate that background a lot, and really appreciate a lot what you were saying. Just, you know, as you know, we had a little overlap of our times at Rutgers University, and you know, this general theme of, you know, sort of food with these different pillars, obviously calories, but also wellness and health, and sort of this you know, this theme at the time, sort of this transitioning of, you know, things from the medicine cabinet to the refrigerator, and just this whole concept of how this area is kind of merging together and blurring in many ways as we get into this 21st century realm of natural and sort of systems that are circular and bio-based. It's really all really fascinating. Before we get into some of my questions that I have just about the technologies and process and so forth, can you just go a little into BlueNalu in terms of, obviously you mentioned the sort of, you bumped into a venture capitalist and so forth, and I'm very interested in entrepreneurship as well, and sort of when we're talking about some of, as you were saying, some of these new industries that you're creating from scratch, you know, what's the process been like in terms of finding investors? Are these strategic investors? Are they traditional venture capitalists? Are they sort of corporate venturing groups that are interested in this area? And just if you could talk a little bit about sort of how the company's grown so far. I think you did a big Series A recently, but you just talk a little bit about that. That'd be great.
That's a lot of topics, but I'll give my best shot. Maybe I'll start off with the investment side. So
Mm-hmm.
we're very fortunate that there were others that saw this whole category of alternative protein that was, frankly on fire.
Yeah.
But however, the people that were making the early investments were people that we saw a new movement. And I've actually been involved with fundraising, over the past, since the mid 90s, at the personal level. So the traditional venture capital, investor historically loved tech, and they didn't think as food as tech, just quite blatantly. And it was really, and I remember in actually my public presentations, I actually talked about a front page article, I think in the food section of the New York Times, right around 2013 timeframe. And it said something like, what if the next best thing in tech doesn't happen in the cloud? What if it happens on your plate? And I remember that article, and I used to talk about that. And the initial activity was really around home delivery, which was, you're familiar with that whole launch, but so it's more about distribution. And then we kind of got into, more about the ag sector and vertical farming and sensor technology. Then slowly it migrated into food, and food tech got exciting. That's very relevant because the investment community didn't really see food tech, as they didn't understand it. And the traditional investors didn't really see the upside value of that. But what happened, in the last several years was that there's definitely a movement towards investors looking to put seed money into startups and alternative protein. And their background, frankly, was a common thread of investor groups that were really looking about certain attributes. They're looking at sustainability, they're looking at animal welfare and suffering, they're looking at climate change. So there are thematic groups that were more focused on, social investing that also had economic returns. That triple bottom line approach of investors, but very much focused on sustainability, but also the animal welfare category. So our early investors actually, overlap quite heavily in that theme. So New Crop Capital, Stray Dog Capital, Clear Current Capital, CPT Capital, companies like that all came in, and they have a genuine commitment towards investing in this alternative protein category. They see it as significant opportunities economically, but they see this as doing something dramatic for the planet. And that's what drives them clearly. And but to your point, the venture capital community still hasn't gotten too deep into this category, and because it needs to be a little more mature. Where they have got into plant-based, because plant-based, frankly, can be commercialized quite readily. And in fact, I saw that as something not personally attractive to me about the category, because it does enable a lot of competition. And cell-based does not. The technology is just enormously different and more complicated, and it's an extraordinary amount of IP involved. Where plant-based uses conventional equipment, and once as has happened with Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, once you have some early adoption that occurs, it's a short time period. And I actually predicted this when I was talking some years ago, before the Nestle's and the Krafts and the Tysons and all the rest are right behind them with extraordinary marketing budgets to really and ability to be a low-cost provider to really be quite a competitor. But cell-based really has a far greater installation opportunity, which will ultimately make this really attractive to the venture community. But right now, as you mentioned, we raised at the time the largest seed round in the world back in 2018. We just recently closed the largest A round, as we define it in this category, in the world as well, with a $20 million round that just closed. And to your point, we did bring in a few venture investors in this most recent round, but we also brought in 5 strategic investors. So we're very excited, Ira, by the amount of support that the strategic investors came in, and specifically we targeted organizations that had 2 kind of core areas of support and how they could focus, and their areas of focus and how they could be supportive of us. One was supply chain. So we recognized that in order to be successful, we really needed to not be seen as a biopharma company, but we are a food company. So we don't want to be associated with some of the large biopharma companies, at the investment level. We really wanted to be seen as aligned with the food industry, because that's what we
Sure.
are. And that also means we want to be aligned with, how the food industry thinks about raw materials.
Right.
So one of our partners was Nutreco, one of the world's largest suppliers of aquaculture feed, because their feed is very relevant to what we feed ourselves. They're feeding living fish. We're feeding living cells from fish. And there's a lot of overlap in some of the logic there. And secondly, a company called Griffith Foods, which is a large supplier of kind of food science ingredients around, really helping companies optimize sensory characteristics, texture, mouthfeel, flavors, colors. So they could be very supportive of us on kind of the R&D side, if you will. Our other three partners that we brought in are on the operations, sales, marketing, distribution side. Include Rich Products, a large organization based in upstate New York that also owns two large seafood retail brands, one called CPAC, one called Mori's Seafood, but also a company in Korea called Pomwan, and a company in Japan, a Fortune 500 company called Sumitomo.
Sure.
So again, they have a tremendous access to the Korean market, Japanese market, and with Rich's, the US market. So we really see ourselves over time working with these partners and others that we'll identify in the future to really bring our product to market, using and leveraging, kind of that infrastructure that these other companies bring to the table.
Excellent. Really appreciate that background. Moving now a little bit into process, and obviously keeping this at a very basic level. And I my day job is in the regenerative medicine industry, and I know a little bit about sort of cells, and then sort of what we'll call sort of the tissue development stage. So you obviously in this case you need to be very good at growing, whether it's tuna or salmon or whatever, culturing these cells, but at the same time we just can't eat cells. You need to turn it into a nice tissue that we eat. Well, I don't know if that's the proper verbiage, but but I read recently that in some of your initial tests, you fried the stuff, you steamed it, you heated it up. I mean, it stayed like a piece of fish. Can you just talk about some of sort of what's involved in both these fronts, and sort of the surprises, anything that you bumped up against where you get a tweak to make you end up with fish soup instead of a piece of salmon or whatever? Maybe a couple stories on that front would be kind of interesting.
I'm happy to share. The kind of the 101 of what we do, if you will, is I think if you think about the future and what this looks like, some people, the way to characterize this, and maybe to help people illustrate what a production environment looks like.
Sure.
It's a little bit like a microbrewery. So we have large, what you ultimately see is large stainless steel tanks that are actually growing fish cells.
Okay.
And helping them grow to very large volumes. So rather than growing, using, yeast and everything else to make beer or to make wine, we're actually growing fish cells in a very kind of similar or way that people might make yogurt or other food categories. And then that microbrewery, if you will, then feeds into what looks like a conventional seafood processing facility.
Okay.
So we might be grilling, searing, smoking, batter bread, frying, or providing product in the raw state to both retail and food service customers. So that's kind of what the future looks like, Ira. And so in order to get there, we put together this 5-phase strategy where we kind of call that phase 5, that large scale operation. Okay. And the preceding phases, literally begin, as all food products do, on the bench, at small scale. And the first thing we need to do is demonstrate, how do we get these cells to grow in those really large volumes I just described? It's never been done before at all in the case of fish cells. So we really began with a blank canvas here, with no knowledge in academia or in industry of actually growing fish cells. The whole industry began with mammalian cells. Yeah. As you know, it's been done for several decades now. But the protocols that work on mammalian cells do not work in fish cells. And what we're trying to create, Ira, is these cell lines, these cells that can divide, continuously, for, potentially indefinitely. And that's something that's really core to our success, is really getting cells to grow. For
Mhm.
example, muscle cells. So the cells that are in the seafood that you consume, the fillet,
Yeah.
are actually primarily muscle cells.
Sure.
So you say, hey, that fish was pretty lean. No, my fish was a little fatty. So that means, well, there's more fat cells in one and less in the other. So you have muscle cells, fat cells, and connective tissue cells are kind of the
Yeah.
three cell types that might exist. So what we need to do is primarily focus on muscle cells, since that's the majority, but also bring in the fat cells and the connective tissue cells. So the way we start, Ira, is we actually take a fish and we actually isolate. For example, working with mahi-mahi,
Hmm.
we're actually making mahi-mahi fillets ultimately from a cell that came from a mahi-mahi fish. And we isolate that cell. Each of these steps is extraordinarily complex, it results in some tremendous proprietary know-how.
Sure.
But successfully isolating these cells, getting them to grow in what industry might call media, we call it feed. We're feeding these cells to get them to continue to grow. They naturally want to stop. Like in your own body, if you kind of smack your arm pretty hard, and it might get a little black and blue. So that might be your muscle, and there are these muscle cells that want
Sure.
to really help stop the damage, but then they do their job and they want to kind of die off.
Hmm.
So our goal is to keep these cells proliferating, and we've been able to accomplish that, and that's been a huge success. But one of the things you mentioned in your question, Ira, was, as we kind of work forward and we have perfected that, our
Hmm.
next step is, let's now convert these cells into a medallion or a fillet of fish. And we were able to accomplish that this past December. It was a huge milestone event for this industry worldwide. But we were the first company to demonstrate that we could actually, our team's objective was to demonstrate functionality. So
Hmm.
what does functionality means? It means that if you really have this figured out, you can create a seafood product
Yep.
that can withstand the same, abrasive behavior that occurs in the way seafood is naturally prepared.
Okay.
Meaning something as abrasive as frying oil. I'm gonna do a beer batter, if you will, and then put it in 350-degree frying oil. Or I might give it, a harsh treatment of acid. To consumer, let's enjoy that ceviche or poke or kimchi. Well,
Sure.
that's an acidified marinade that actually degrades tissue. Or you might have it raw. So whether the product is heated in any way it might be heated, does it grill, does it brown, does it saute, does it fry, can it take acid, can it be prepared raw? And we were demonstrating this in this event that yes, we were 100%. We hit every objective we wanted to in all three states of preparation. It
Hmm.
performed same as conventional yellowtail. Our first application was actually a yellowtail amberjack, um, and it's something that's popular in the food service industry. But our first product we're introducing will be mahi mahi.
Mm.
What we're actually creating, Ira, is basically a library. So we're having mahi mahi, red snapper, yellowtail amberjack, tuna. These type of species will be things that we have developed these cell lines for. So we ultimately have this phase 5 factory. We'll actually be able to turn off, if you will, red snapper production and turn on tuna production, different cell lines, from a fish that originally was a red snapper or tuna. So it's a total paradigm shift. Today's world, you're shipping fish maybe 7,000 miles from whatever, or 9,000
Yep.
miles from Southeast Asia to New York City or New Jersey.
Yeah.
And here you could actually, with 30 to 50% bycatch and maybe 60% yield, and we're resulting in a product with 100% yield that could have been produced locally. So we're really
Hmm.
redefining local when it comes to seafood, with much like the brewery industry has,
Sure.
really bringing products, close to home.
Really.
So that's a little snapshot of the production process of where we're heading.
Very, very cool. You got to keep me away from your factory because I'll eat the hell out of that place. I, I especially the yellowtail. I love sushi, and haven't
Oh,
been
excellent.
getting any of it last couple of months, but anyway. Uh, um, as I'm listening to, I mean, it's amazing stuff, Lou. Thinking about your expertise in food science and microbiology, you also have this, amazing sort of portfolio of expertise in food safety, quality, dealing with regulatory agencies. Um, Once again, I'm from the drug side of things, but who are your eventual regulators here? Is it like a traditional process with medicine? Is such a thing an IND? Like, what's involved? If you could sort of go through sort of yeah, in other words, I want to eat the fish soon. What do you have to do to get it to market in terms of these regulators?
We're excited you want to be one of our first customers. That's
Oh,
great.
absolutely. Yeah.
I,
All right.
I think the important point to state, Ira, is what we're developing is a food product, just made a
Yeah.
different way, in a new
Right.
way. But so because it's a food product, it falls under FDA, the
Okay.
Food Drug Administration, which also regulates drugs.
Sure.
But obviously, I forgot the percentage, but I'll make up a number. It's definitely way north of 2/3 or 3/4 of our total foods we eat are under regulation of FDA, and the balance
Yeah.
is USDA.
Yeah.
So meat and poultry are under USDA, seafood is under FDA. Traditionally, one thing to mention, Ira, was the FDA and USDA got together a little over 2 years ago, I think it was, and they essentially were really proactive in a very positive demonstration themselves, that they basically said to the world, cell-based protein technology is coming. We embrace this. They had public meetings in DC, and they encouraged individuals to come and talk about it and testify, and which I did.
Mm-hmm.
And it was basically, a public meeting to that the FDA and USDA would say, this is an industry that is very familiar to us, that the technologies are used in various other sectors, in some cases drugs, some cases foods, fermentation, all sorts of technologies. They basically said, we have a comfort zone in regulating this. No new legislation is required. But they also weren't sure how to regulate cell-based meats, because it was the FDA had more experience in this category,
Mm-hmm.
because they also regulate drugs. And the USDA obviously has experience with the meat and poultry sector, primarily on the labeling side and making sure that we're working closely with the animal agricultural sector. So what became out of that, Ira, was that the USDA and FDA decided that they would jointly regulate cell-based meat and poultry jointly, but FDA would solely regulate, their own comfort zone and the area that they have expertise in, which is cell-based seafood.
Sure.
So to answer your question, we're under FDA, oversight, and they're the organization that will regulate us ultimately. And FDA and USDA have both encouraged, organization in the space to, quote, come early and often. Please meet with us.
Okay.
We need to learn more about this industry so we can, make sure that we have the appropriate protocols in place. And in fact, BlueNalu has done that. So we've actually, began that process last year, actually meeting with the FDA and speaking to them, making them aware of our team, our commitment, our transparency, our total focus. As you mentioned, my own background in food safety. I've even been involved, even the program I ran at Rutgers, we also even trained the FDA in the new FSMA regulations, and they just got launched because we had that level of safety infrastructure in place, and I in turn became a certified instructor. So we're very familiar with what FDA is looking for.
Sure.
But on the other hand, this is a brand new space, and the FDA is not exactly sure what exactly companies are doing. So we said, here's our process. Also realize other companies might have a different process.
Yeah.
Very importantly, we're not using any genetic engineering. Others are. That might result in a different approach. We don't know. It's not our responsibility. We're just saying, here's what we do, and here's all the things that we're anticipating doing in the future. And with that, we've been able to establish, what the process would be to actually provide all the information the FDA will require in order to say, we're satisfied. You guys have done an excellent job in demonstrating product safety, and also whatever would be appropriate for product labeling as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a brand new. We're excited that the FDA is taking this approach, and we also recognize that around the world, other agencies will quickly adopt the fact that a company like BlueNalu was approved by the FDA. That means countries in Asia or Europe
Sure.
will see that as a huge stamp of approval, and those agencies will similarly recognize that this category is perfectly safe. But they also have to really think about how this product will be labeled as well. So so but all these things are happening, Ira, and it's very
Excellent.
exciting.
Yeah, it's great that you have experience on all on all fronts, because so as you said, it's one thing to have all these technologies, but you have to have, as you say in your case, the know-how to work through the regulatory agencies and get the product to market. And I think that's great. Um, one other question, and here we are in April 2020. We're in the middle of a major pandemic, the COVID-19. And one thing that's become evident through in the news and so forth is the fact that aside from the chicken and the meat and the pigs and so forth, that there's a lot of people out there eating other things, and whether that be bats or pangolins or whatever for calories or for ethnomedicinal purposes. Um, People are consuming all sorts of exotic stuff as well. That being said, I'm just clearly, you know, the yellowtail and the mahi-mai and the salmon tuna. That's all wonderful. Are you getting any odd requests, any exotic requests? Because it seems to me that with this type of technology, the same technology that makes tuna or salmon can just as easily make whale meat or giant squid or or something strange. Any eccentric billionaires or princes or anything approaching you guys about making other types of stuff?
It's a great question. I think we recognize that this technology allows us to really think very broadly, like you're asking about what can we make. We can technically work on a species. There's various ways to answer that question. We can work on a species that's so rare but so loved,
Yeah.
or maybe has been overfished literally and is gone and extinct. As long as we have cells, we could actually create a product that represents something that it's like bringing back the Jersey tomato, for example, same kind of concept,
Yeah.
but actually, providing the best tasting, the highest quality product, so we can replicate that. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is we've also had requests, that sort of where I think you're going is we could offer a product that might have, more nutritional density,
Nice.
be a higher source of protein, more omegas, because we are in fact controlling the feed of the cells, just like somebody in aquaculture is controlling the feed of living fish. But they're working in a very different system environment.
Yeah.
But we can actually do something on the fortification side that could be a real positive benefit for people in food insecure countries.
Yeah.
So it clearly could have an opportunity in underdeveloped countries, for example. Another request is a different kind of species, or different kinds of meat. So all those things are possible, but our first focus, Ira, is let's just do, one for one. We really want to begin with, and it makes life easier too. Let's just, let's demonstrate same nutritional requirements, or same nutritional components. I mean, the same functional benefits. So that's what we're demonstrating now, that our product is in fact one for one, the same as conventional yellowtail or mahi-mahi or red snapper or tuna, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. Version 2.0, just like the early Mac and the current Macs, have evolved considerably. So where we go in the future could be quite interesting. But today we want to begin with our 1.0. That's same as.
Sure.
But the future opportunities could really lend themselves to lots of other benefits.
Sure, it's gonna be an interesting future.
But I just want to stress the fact that our products from day one, where they're one for one, what they don't have, they have all the positives of seafood.
Mm-hmm.
They frankly don't have the negatives. They don't have mercury.
Right.
So they offer an opportunity for women of childbearing age to consume seafood safely. and not be concerned about that, and for the whole family that might not be eating seafood during that time when a woman is pregnant or nursing.
Mm-hmm.
So right now there's three buckets, if you will. Avoid these seafood altogether.
Right.
Limit your intake to like one serving or two servings a week, or no more than two or three of another category. With us, you can have as much as you want.
Mm.
No mercury, no microplastics, no concern about environmental pollutants, no concern about mislabeling that occurs in this industry
Oh yeah.
with seafood. So it really has all the positives and none of the negatives that you might be concerned about. So it really results in as we describe it, a product that's healthy for people, humane for sea life, and sustainable for the planet.
Nice.
So it's really, and one more thing I just also want to mention too, Ira, is that
Sure.
we're very focused on species that are today typically imported. So our goal is not even to disrupt or displace aquaculture in the home country.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the U.S. For example, we're not working on salmon, in the United States, because we do salmon really well. So we're actually, however, people don't realize that according to the FDA, 94% of our seafood that we consume is imported. Big number. And that's an issue around the world.
Yeah.
So there is no local business, and what local business there is, it typically does it pretty well. So we're very focused on actually displacing imports, displacing in our case at 94%. So we're not only offering all these benefits, we're also even, helping to maintain those jobs. We could put factories in communities where that might be has some economic distress.
Mm-hmm.
And we can in fact create jobs. So it's really a win on every front, so it's the upside is really quite significant.
Lou, coming back to you, obviously you've met quite a few fascinating people in the investment community, in the scientific community, the regulatory community, and so forth throughout your career. Any important influencers, mentors, anyone along these lines that you might want to give a shout out to, that, specifically one for them, that Lou Cooperhouse would be doing something different right now and not on this path? Anyone specifically you want to highlight at this point in the show?
I'll just wave a shout out to my parents. Rest in peace. But they certainly gave me that guidance to really be my own person, and they offered me an opportunity to take over the business that they had after my dad retired. But I really wanted to follow my passion, and I really enjoyed the startup world. And I think the other shout out is to really all the other entrepreneurs I worked with over the years, and there's way too many to mention by name.
Sure.
But it's all about the team, Ira. It's just really, I think what I've learned about as a manager is you need to really surround yourself with as I call it, everybody needs authors and editors. An author loves to create, an editor likes to make things better. So it's really putting together a team that's cross-functional, that works together, that collaborates, and life evolves. From it can't start with the most brilliant people in the world. You got to start with, the people that have the vision to get there. You can't afford all these great agencies and this great support network, and but you really want the other passionate entrepreneurs like yourself to really surround the company. So whether it's technology, operations, or regulatory. So we did that at BlueNalu, and I really enjoyed that earlier in my career as well. Just really bringing in a team of individuals that really share the passion and frankly can, but also bring the competency to be. There's also, as there's book smart and street smart. Yep. So I think there's a lot to be said for street smart. Having this tremendous knowledge of many things is great, but the ability to execute, work with people is what it's all about.
Oh yeah.
We're all human beings, and we got to know how to communicate with each other. And I've been very, very fortunate to just learn from this person or that person or the other. Just various tactics, and I think that's what it's all about for any entrepreneur, is really to surround yourself with passionate people that really want to make a difference, but also realize that you're learning from everybody.
Yep.
What you are is just a manifestation of everything you've learned from others. And just to be a very aware and observant person along the way.
Well, Lou, this was eye-opening. I'm extremely impressed by everything you have going on. I can't wait till you commercialize. I'm going to be a customer right, right off the bat. It's truly a really a fascinating future you have. Well, you're creating it, but to see it coming and seeing them come together, it must be really feel good for someone like you. And for everybody that's going to be watching this episode on the YouTube channel or listening on the various podcast networks, we've been speaking with the amazing Lou Cooperhouse, President and CEO of BlueNalu, leading the charge, leading the industry in the area of cellular aquaculture, going to be providing us all with great tasting, healthy, safe seafood products, supporting the sustainability and diversity in the ocean. Lou, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for doing everything you're doing. And as we say on the show, thank you for moving the human and the marine story forward one step at a time. This was really a wonderful show. Thanks so much for being here.
For having me. Appreciate it.